The gunshot that killed Natalie Voss's father echoed through her memory every single day, a sound that had transformed her from a trusting girl into a woman who slept with a loaded pistol under her pillow and never turned her back to an open door. She stood now in the dusty streets of Telluride, Colorado in the summer of 1878, her green eyes scanning the crowd outside the general store with the wariness of a hunted animal, watching for any sign of the men who had murdered her father 3 months prior and left her with nothing but a failing ranch and a heart full of suspicion. The mountain air carried the scent of pine and possibility, but Natalie tasted only bitterness as she clutched her shopping list, written in her mother's careful hand before consumption had taken her 2 years back. Everything in Telluride reminded her of loss. The silver mines that dotted the surrounding peaks had brought fortune seekers and criminals alike, creating a town where a woman alone was considered either desperate or foolish. And Natalie had grown tired of the pitying looks from the townspeople who whispered about the Voss girl who refused to sell her land and move somewhere civilized. She had just emerged from the store, arms loaded with supplies she could barely afford, when a tall figure stepped directly into her path. Natalie's instinct was to reach for the small derringer hidden in her skirt pocket, but her hands were too full. She looked up into a face that belonged to a man perhaps 26 or 27 years old, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of aged whiskey. He wore the dust of the trail on his clothes and the kind of worn leather chaps that spoke of long days in the saddle. "Pardon me, miss," he said, tipping his hat with a courtesy that seemed genuine rather than mocking. "Didn't mean to startle you. I'm looking for the land office. New to town." Natalie's jaw tightened as she sidestepped him without a word. She had learned that engaging with strangers led nowhere good. The man's expression shifted from polite inquiry to something resembling understanding, and he simply nodded and moved aside to let her pass. She felt his gaze on her back as she walked toward the livery stable where her horse waited, and the sensation made her skin prickle with unease. The ride back to her ranch took 40 minutes through terrain that grew more rugged as she left town behind. The property her father had claimed and built sat in a valley between 2 peaks, with a creek running through it that never ran dry even in the hottest summers. It should have been paradise, but instead it felt like a prison she could not escape, because selling it would mean letting her father's killers win, letting them profit from their violence by purchasing the land they had tried to intimidate her family into abandoning. She had just finished unloading her supplies when she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Natalie's hand went immediately to the rifle she kept propped beside the door, and she stepped onto the porch with the weapon held loosely but ready. The rider who emerged from the tree line was the same man from town, and her finger moved closer to the trigger. "That's far enough," she called out, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "State your business or turn around." The stranger reined in his horse, a solid buckskin gelding that looked as road-weary as its rider. He raised both hands slowly, demonstrating he meant no threat. "Name's Lucas Xavier, madam. I just bought the Henderson place about 2 miles north of here. Came to introduce myself to my neighbors, seeing as we'll be sharing fence line." Natalie's eyes narrowed. The Henderson place had been abandoned for 6 months after old Tom Henderson had died without heirs. She had half hoped it would remain empty, creating a buffer between her land and the rest of the world. "You wasted your time. I don't socialize with neighbors and I don't need any help with anything. You can ride back the way you came." Lucas Xavier studied her for a long moment, and she saw something in his expression that looked like recognition, though not of her face. It was the recognition of someone who understood the walls a person built when the world had proven itself cruel. "Fair enough," he said quietly. But if you change your mind or if you need anything, the offer stands. Being neighbors in country like this, it's just common sense to look out for each other." "I look out for myself," Natalie replied coldly. "Have since I learned that trusting people gets you nothing but a bullet in the back and a grave on a hillside." She saw his expression shift, sympathy flickering across his features, and it made her angry because she did not want his pity. Before he could respond, she continued, "The Henderson place has a problem with the well. Water's good, but the pump mechanism is rusted through. You'll need to replace it before winter or you'll be melting snow for drinking water." Lucas's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's neighborly information for someone who doesn't socialize." "It's practical information," Natalie corrected sharply. "If you die of thirst on that property, your body will attract predators that might wander onto my land. Self-interest, nothing more." A hint of a smile touched the corner of his mouth, but he had the good sense not to let it develop into anything that might offend her further. "Well, I appreciate the warning either way, Miss Voss, Natalie Voss." She did not know why she gave him her name except that refusing might have seemed childish, and she was determined to maintain her dignity even in isolation. "Miss Voss." He touched his hat brim again in that same courteous gesture. "I'll leave you to your evening. Thank you for the information about the well." He turned his horse and rode back toward the tree line, and Natalie watched him go with conflicting emotions swirling in her chest. Part of her felt relief at his departure. Another part, a part she tried hard to ignore, felt something that might have been loneliness. She crushed that feeling ruthlessly and went back inside, bolting the door behind her. Over the following weeks, she saw Lucas Xavier 3 more times in town, and each time he offered a polite greeting that never demanded more than she was willing to give. He did not push for conversation or try to insert himself into her space. He simply acknowledged her presence with a nod or a quietly spoken "Miss Voss," and went about his business. It was so different from the behavior of other men in Telluride, who either avoided her entirely as though her tragic circumstances might be contagious, or approached her with false sympathy that barely concealed their interest in acquiring her land. The 4th time she encountered him was different. She had been trying to load a heavy bag of grain into her wagon when the stitching gave way, spilling feed across the ground in a cascade of golden kernels. Frustration brought tears to her eyes that she angrily blinked away, refusing to break down in the middle of town where everyone could see. She knelt to begin scooping the grain back into what remained of the bag, knowing it was futile but unable to simply walk away from supplies she had paid for with money she could not spare. "Got an extra feed sack in my wagon if you need it." She looked up to find Lucas standing a respectful distance away, not moving closer without permission. His offer was made in a matter-of-fact tone that contained no pity, no judgment, just simple observation of a problem and a potential solution. Natalie wanted to refuse on principle, but practicality warred with pride and won. "I can pay you for it." "Did not ask you to pay. It's a feed sack, Miss Voss, not a gold nugget." He walked to his own wagon and returned with a sturdy burlap bag that looked significantly stronger than the one that had failed her. He set it down beside her, and then, without asking, knelt and began helping her scoop the spilled grain. "I did not ask for your help," she said, but her protest lacked heat. "No, you did not," he agreed, continuing to work. "But my mama raised me to lend a hand when I see someone who needs it, whether they ask or not. You can be angry about it if you want. Will not change what I'm doing." They worked in silence for several minutes, salvaging what they could of the spilled feed. When the task was complete and the grain was secured in the new bag, Lucas lifted it easily and placed it in her wagon. Natalie stood with her hands clenched at her sides, uncertain how to respond to assistance she had not requested but genuinely needed. "Thank you," she finally said, the words coming out stiff and uncomfortable because it had been so long since she had relied on anyone but herself. Lucas nodded. "You're welcome. That bag should hold better than the last one. Store's been selling inferior goods lately. The stitching's coming from back east and it is not holding up like it should." He started to walk away, then paused and turned back. "Miss Voss, I know you have got your reasons for keeping people at a distance. I do not know what they are and you do not owe me an explanation. But I want you to know that my offer of neighborly assistance stands whenever you might need it. No strings attached, no expectations. Just one person helping another because that is how decent folks ought to behave." Natalie felt something crack in the armor she had built around herself, just a small fissure, but it terrified her. "Why?" she demanded, her voice sharper than she intended. "You do not know me. You do not owe me anything. What do you want?" Lucas met her gaze steadily. "I do not want anything except to live peacefully on my own land and maybe make this corner of Colorado a little less lonely for everyone trying to survive in it. I have been where you are, Miss Voss. Maybe not the exact same circumstances, but I know what it's like to believe the whole world's against you and trusting anyone will just lead to more pain. Then you understand why I prefer to be left alone." She climbed onto her wagon seat, gathering the reins in hands that trembled slightly. "I understand it," he said quietly. "But I also know that alone is not the same as safe, and isolated is not the same as protected. Sometimes the walls we build to keep hurt out also keep out the things that might heal us." "I cannot trust anyone," Natalie said, the words bursting from her like a confession she had not meant to make. "Every person I have trusted has either died or betrayed me. I am alone because that is the only way to survive." Lucas was silent for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a gentleness that made her throat tighten. "Then let me earn it slowly. Your trust, I mean. I am not asking you to hand over anything today or tomorrow or next week. I am just asking you to let me prove through time and action that not everyone in this world is out to hurt you." She wanted to laugh at the impossibility of what he was suggesting, but the sound died in her throat. Instead, she looked at this stranger who spoke with such earnest conviction, and she found herself giving the smallest of nods. "You will be disappointed." "Maybe," he acknowledged, "but I doubt it." Natalie drove her wagon out of town with her mind churning, replaying the conversation and trying to understand why she had not simply refused and ridden away. Perhaps it was exhaustion from carrying the weight of suspicion and fear every moment of every day. Perhaps it was the approaching autumn, and the knowledge that winter in the Colorado mountains was brutal for someone managing a ranch alone. Or perhaps it was something in Lucas Xavier's eyes that suggested he truly did understand what it meant to be wounded by the world. 3 days later, she found a cord of split firewood stacked neatly beside her barn, enough to last through several weeks of cold weather. No note accompanied it, but she knew who had left it. Her first instinct was anger at the presumption, but as she ran her hand over the cleanly split logs, she could not deny the relief that flooded through her. Cutting firewood was time-consuming work, and every hour spent on such tasks was an hour she could not spend on the 100 other things needed to keep the ranch running. She did not thank him the next time she saw him in town, but she did not ignore him either. When he tipped his hat and wished her good morning, she returned the greeting with a curt nod. It was a small thing, barely an acknowledgement, but from Natalie Voss, it represented a significant shift. As September gave way to October and the aspens on the mountainsides turned brilliant gold, Lucas continued his patient campaign of earning trust through action rather than words. He fixed a section of her fence line that bordered his property, explaining when she confronted him that a broken fence was a problem for both of them since her cattle could wander onto his land and vice versa. He left vegetables from his garden on her porch, always just a few items wrapped in cloth, never so much that it felt like charity but enough to supplement her supplies. He asked nothing in return and made no demands on her time or attention. Natalie found herself watching for him when she went to town, though she would have denied it if anyone had asked. She began to anticipate their brief encounters, the quiet exchanges that never pushed beyond her comfort but left her feeling slightly less alone in the world. It was dangerous, this softening she felt happening inside her, and she tried to resist it even as part of her yearned for connection. The first frost came early that year, sweeping down from the peaks and turning the morning grass silver. Natalie was checking her cattle when she noticed one of her cows had gotten caught in a ravine, wedged between rocks with a broken leg. The humane thing would be to put the animal down, but the practical problem was getting to it in terrain too steep for her to navigate safely alone. She stared at the suffering cow for a long moment, weighing her options. She could let it die slowly, which her conscience would not allow. She could risk injury trying to reach it herself, which would be foolish, or she could ride to the Henderson place and ask Lucas for help. The fact that she even considered the third option showed how much had shifted in the past weeks. With a frustrated sound, she mounted her horse and rode toward the northern boundary of her property. She found Lucas working on the roof of his barn, replacing shingles damaged by summer hail. He saw her approaching and climbed down immediately, reading something in her posture that suggested this was not a social call. "I have a cow stuck in a ravine on the eastern edge of my property," she said without preamble. "It has a broken leg. I need help reaching it to put it down humanely." Lucas grabbed his rifle without hesitation. "Show me." They rode together in silence, and Natalie was acutely aware of his presence beside her. When they reached the ravine, he studied the situation with a practiced eye, then looked at her. "I can get down there. You'll need to anchor the rope from up here in case I slip." "It should be me," Natalie argued. "It is my cow, my responsibility." "It should be whoever has the better chance of not breaking their neck on those rocks," Lucas countered calmly. "I've got longer reach and more weight to keep me stable. Let me do this, Miss Voss." She wanted to argue further but recognized the logic in his words. They worked together to set up the safety rope, and then she watched with her heart in her throat as Lucas descended into the ravine. He moved with careful confidence, finding handholds and footholds that looked impossibly small from her vantage point. When he reached the cow, he spoke softly to it, gentling the frightened animal before doing what needed to be done with quick, merciful efficiency. The climb back up was harder than the descent, and twice Lucas's boots slipped on loose rock. Each time, Natalie's grip on the safety rope tightened until her knuckles went white. When he finally hauled himself over the edge of the ravine, breathing hard from exertion, she felt a wave of relief so intense it left her shaken. "Thank you," she said, and this time the words came more easily. "I could not have done that alone." Lucas nodded, catching his breath. "Sometimes we need help. It is not weakness to acknowledge that." They stood there on the edge of the ravine as the sun climbed higher, and Natalie felt the careful distance she had maintained between them shrinking. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked. "All of it. The firewood, the fence, coming here today. What do you want from me?" He turned to face her fully, and the honesty in his eyes was almost painful to witness. "I told you. I do not want anything except to be a decent neighbor and maybe a friend if you'll allow it. I know what it's like to be alone, Miss Voss. I spent 3 years drifting after I lost my family to scarlet fever back in Missouri. 3 years of not letting anyone close because it hurt too much to risk caring and losing again. I understand that fear because I lived it. How did you stop? The question emerged quietly, vulnerably. How did you start trusting again? I realized that living without trust was not really living at all, Lucas said. It was just existing, going through motions, keeping my heart locked away so tight that nothing could hurt it, but nothing could touch it either. One day I woke up and understood that I had survived the worst thing I could imagine, and I was still here. And if I was going to be here, I wanted to actually be alive, not just breathing. Natalie looked away, blinking against the sting in her eyes. My father was killed by men who wanted our land. They tried to make it look like an accident, but I know what I heard that night. Gunshots, voices, my father calling out. By the time I ran outside, they were gone and he was dying. He made me promise not to sell the ranch, not to let them win. And then he was gone and I was alone. It was the first time she had spoken the full truth aloud to anyone, and saying the words felt like lancing a wound that had been festering inside her. Lucas's expression filled with a sorrow that matched her own. I am so sorry. That kind of loss, that kind of betrayal of what should be basic human decency, it changes a person. It made me into this, Natalie gestured at herself. Someone who sees threats in every shadow and cannot accept help without suspecting ulterior motives. Someone so broken that a simple act of kindness feels like a trap. You are not broken, Lucas said firmly. You are wounded, and that is different. Wounds can heal if they are given time and care. I do not know how to let them heal. Her voice cracked on the admission. Start small, he suggested gently. Let me buy you lunch in town. Nothing dramatic, just 2 neighbors sharing a meal and conversation. If at any point you want to leave, you can walk out and I will not follow or press for more. But give yourself the chance to sit across a table from someone who wishes you well and see if maybe the world is not quite as hostile as it seems. Every instinct Natalie possessed screamed at her to refuse, to retreat back into the safety of isolation. But a newer, quieter voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, Lucas Xavier was offering something worth the risk. Just lunch, she said finally. And if I decide to leave, you will not try to stop me or convince me to stay. You have my word, Lucas promised. They rode back to their respective properties in a silence that felt less heavy than before. And Natalie spent the rest of the day alternating between regret at agreeing to lunch and a strange flutter of anticipation she had not felt since before her father's death. 3 days later, they met at the small restaurant in Telluride that served hearty meals to miners and ranchers. Natalie arrived early, securing a table near the door where she could see everyone who entered and exited. When Lucas arrived, he simply sat down across from her without comment on her strategic positioning. Thank you for coming, he said. I was not entirely sure you would. I made a commitment, Natalie replied. I may have trouble trusting others, but I keep my word. They ordered simple fare, beef stew and fresh bread, and for the first few minutes they ate in awkward silence. Then Lucas began to talk, not about anything heavy or personal, just observations about the town and the changing season. He told a story about his horse getting spooked by a tumbling tumbleweed and nearly dumping him in a creek, and despite herself, Natalie felt her mouth curve into something almost resembling a smile. I have not seen you smile before, Lucas observed. It suits you. The compliment made her tense, and he noticed immediately. I am sorry. I did not mean to make you uncomfortable. I am just observing that happiness looks good on you, even if it is only for a moment. I am not used to happiness, Natalie admitted. I am not even sure I remember what it feels like beyond brief flashes that disappear before I can hold on to them. Then maybe we should work on that, Lucas said. Not rushing, not pushing, just creating space for those flashes to happen more often and last a little longer. She studied him across the table, this man who had inserted himself into her life with such patient determination. Why me? There must be a dozen unmarried women in Telluride who would welcome your attention without all this difficulty. Lucas set down his spoon and met her gaze directly. Because when I look at you, I see someone real. Someone who has been tested and survived, someone who does not pretend or play games. I see strength and courage, even if right now those qualities are wrapped up in fear and pain. And I see someone worth knowing, worth the patience it takes to get past the walls. Natalie felt her breath catch. No one had spoken to her like that in so long, seeing past the defensive brittleness to something underneath that she herself had almost forgotten existed. You might be disappointed when you actually get to know me. I am not the person I was before my father died. That girl was softer, kinder. This version of me is hard and suspicious and angry most of the time. Everyone is changed by grief and loss, Lucas said quietly. I am not the same man I was before fever took my wife and daughter. But that does not mean we are less than we were, just different. And sometimes different is exactly what we need to become to survive. You lost a wife and daughter. Natalie's voice softened with shared understanding of profound loss. 3 years ago. Clara was 24, and little Emma had just turned 2. It happened so fast I barely had time to understand what was happening before they were gone. Lucas's eyes held old pain, the kind that never fully disappeared but learned to coexist with ongoing life. I blamed myself for months. If I had called the doctor sooner, if I had known the fever was serious, if I had done 1,000 things differently, maybe they would have lived. It nearly destroyed me. What changed? Natalie asked. Time, mostly. And the realization that I was dishonoring their memory by giving up on living. Clara would have hated seeing me that way, hollow and going through motions. She was so full of life, so determined to find joy in small things. Letting grief consume me completely felt like letting her down. They talked through the rest of the meal, sharing stories of loss and survival, and Natalie felt something she had not experienced in months. Understood. Lucas did not try to fix her pain or minimize it. He simply acknowledged it, matched it with his own, and created a space where both could exist without judgment. When they parted outside the restaurant, Natalie found herself saying, "We could do this again, if you would like." "I would like that very much," Lucas replied, and the warmth in his voice sent an unfamiliar flutter through her chest. Over the following weeks, lunch became a regular occurrence, and slowly Natalie felt herself opening in ways she had not thought possible. She told Lucas about her mother's long illness, about the financial strain that had driven her father to take risks that ultimately led to his death. She spoke about the men who had threatened them, trying to force a sale through intimidation, and how she had recognized one of their voices the night her father was killed, but had no proof, nothing that would convince the sheriff to investigate properly. Lucas listened to everything, never offering empty platitudes or false promises that justice would prevail. Instead, he offered presence and attention, giving her the gift of being truly heard. In turn, he shared more about his own journey through grief, the aimless years of drifting from town to town, working odd jobs and never staying long enough to form connections. He described the moment he had seen the Henderson property and felt something shift inside him, a recognition that it was time to stop running and start rebuilding. "Why here?" Natalie asked during one of their lunches. "Why Telluride?" Lucas smiled. "Honestly, the mountains reminded me of a place Clara and I had talked about moving someday. She loved high country, said it made her feel closer to heaven. When I rode through that valley and saw the peaks all around, I thought maybe it was a sign that I was finally ready to honor her memory by living the kind of life she would have wanted for me. She sounds like she was a remarkable woman. She was, and she would have liked you." Lucas reached across the table and gently touched Natalie's hand, a brief contact that sent electricity up her arm. "You have that same quality she had, of being fundamentally true to yourself even when it would be easier to pretend or compromise." Natalie did not pull away from his touch, though her instinct still urged caution. "I feel like I am betraying my own rules by letting you get close. Every time I see you, I tell myself I should maintain distance, should protect myself better. But then I am with you and those rules seem less important than they did before." "Trust is not weakness," Lucas said softly. "It is actually the bravest thing a person can offer, especially after they have been hurt. The fact that you are willing to even consider trusting again shows incredible courage." As autumn deepened into early winter, Natalie found her thoughts increasingly occupied by Lucas Xavier. She caught herself looking forward to their meetings, planning conversations in her head, wondering what he was doing on the days they did not see each other. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, this growing attachment that made her feel vulnerable in ways she had sworn to never allow again. One evening in late November, an early winter storm rolled through the valley with unexpected ferocity, dumping snow and bringing temperatures that plummeted well below freezing. Natalie had been in town when the weather turned and had to race the storm home, arriving just as visibility dropped to almost nothing. She got her horse into the barn and herself into the house, but she could hear her cattle lowing in distress, scattered by the sudden blizzard. She knew she should go out and try to herd them closer to shelter, but the storm was intensifying by the minute, and going out in it alone would be dangerous. She was standing on her porch, weighing her options, when she saw a figure emerging from the white-out conditions, leading a horse and moving with determined purpose toward her house. "Lucas," she called out, disbelieving. He reached the porch, covered in snow and breathing hard. "Saw the storm coming and figured you might need help with your stock. This is a bad one, came out of nowhere. You rode through this to check on me." Natalie's heart did something complicated in her chest, warmth spreading through her despite the brutal cold. "Told you I meant it about being a good neighbor," Lucas said, brushing snow from his shoulders. "Your cattle are scattered pretty far. We should bring them in closer to the barn where they will have some windbreak." They worked together for the next hour in conditions that grew increasingly harsh, rounding up cattle and guiding them toward the relative shelter of the barnyard. The wind howled around them, driving snow into every exposed bit of skin, and visibility was so poor they had to stay close to avoid losing track of each other. By the time they got the last of the animals secured, both were soaked through and shaking with cold. "You need to warm up before you try to ride home," Natalie said, her teeth chattering. "Come inside." Lucas hesitated. "I do not want to impose or make you uncomfortable." "You just spent an hour in a blizzard helping me save my cattle," Natalie replied, already heading toward the house. "The least I can do is offer you hot coffee and a chance to thaw out before you head back. Besides, the storm is too bad now. You would be taking your life in your hands trying to ride home in this." Inside, she built up the fire while Lucas stood dripping on the rug by the door, looking uncertain about venturing further into her private space. Natalie brought him a blanket and a towel, then put coffee on to boil. "You can change out of those wet clothes if you want. I have some of my father's old things that might fit you." "I will be fine," Lucas said, but he was shivering violently enough that the words lacked conviction. "Do not be stubborn," Natalie ordered, disappearing into her father's old room and returning with dry clothes. Change. That is not a request. Lucas smiled despite his obvious discomfort. Yes, madam. He changed in the small washroom while Natalie did the same in her bedroom, both of them stripping out of wet, frozen garments and into dry warmth. When they reconvened by the fire, wrapped in blankets and holding cups of hot coffee, the situation felt intensely intimate in a way that had nothing to do with anything improper and everything to do with shared vulnerability. "Thank you," Natalie said quietly, "for coming out in the storm. You could have been hurt or lost in that whiteout. It was a foolish risk." "Maybe," Lucas acknowledged, "but the thought of you out there alone, trying to handle all this by yourself, that was not acceptable to me. I had to make sure you were all right. Why do you care so much?" The question was plaintive rather than defensive. "I have been nothing but difficult since the day we met. I have pushed you away at every turn, questioned your motives, made it clear I did not want your help or your company. Most people would have given up long ago." Lucas set down his coffee and turned to face her fully. "Because underneath all that defensiveness, I see someone extraordinary. Someone who gets up every morning and faces impossible odds without backing down. Someone who has been hurt terribly but refuses to let that hurt turn her cruel or bitter. You are not easy, Natalie, but you are genuine and brave and worth every bit of patience it takes to get close to you." Hearing her first name from his lips sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with cold. "You are the first person to call me Natalie in months. Everyone else calls me Miss Voss, like using my first name would be presumptuous. Would you prefer I call you Miss Voss?" "No," she said softly. "I like hearing my name from you. It makes me feel like a person again instead of just a tragic figure people whisper about." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire and listening to the storm rage outside. Eventually, Lucas spoke again. "This storm is going to last through the night. I should bed down in your barn so I am not compromising your reputation by staying in the house." "That is ridiculous," Natalie protested. "The barn is freezing and you just got warm. You can sleep here by the fire. I trust you." The words surprised her as much as they seemed to surprise him. "You trust me," Lucas repeated carefully, as though testing the weight of the statement. "I do," Natalie realized with something like wonder. "I do not know exactly when it happened, but somewhere along the way I stopped questioning your motives and started believing you meant what you said. You have earned it, Lucas. Slowly, like you promised, but you have earned my trust." The expression on his face was worth every moment of fear and resistance she had put him through. "That might be the best gift anyone has ever given me." "It is not a gift," she corrected gently. "It is something you worked for and deserve. You have been patient and kind and steady when I gave you every reason to walk away. I am sorry it took me so long to see what you were offering." Lucas reached out slowly, giving her time to pull back, and took her hand in his. His palm was warm and calloused from work, solid and real in a way that made her feel anchored. "You took exactly as long as you needed. There is no apology necessary." Natalie looked down at their joined hands, marveling at how natural it felt despite months of keeping everyone at arm's length. "I am scared," she admitted. "Letting someone matter again means they can hurt me again. Everyone I have cared about has either left or been taken from me. What if trusting you, letting myself care about you, just leads to more pain?" "That is always a possibility," Lucas said honestly. "I cannot promise I will never hurt you, or that nothing bad will ever happen to us. Life does not work that way, and we have both learned that the hard way. But I can promise that any hurt would never be intentional, and I can promise that I will show up every single day and choose you, choose us, for as long as you will have me. That is a big promise. It is the only one that matters." He squeezed her hand gently. I am falling in love with you, Natalie. I have been falling for weeks now, watching you soften and open up, seeing glimpses of the woman you are beneath all the armor. I am not asking you to say it back or feel the same way. I am just telling you the truth because you deserve honesty. Natalie's breath caught in her throat. Love. The word terrified her and thrilled her simultaneously. I do not know if I remember how to love someone, she whispered. I have spent so long shutting down every tender feeling, every moment of connection. What if I have forgotten how? I do not think people forget how to love, Lucas said softly. I think we just get scared and protect ourselves. But love is like water finding its way through rock. Given time and patience, it finds the cracks and seeps through, persistent and inevitable. She looked into his eyes, those warm, whiskey-colored eyes that had watched her with such patience and understanding, and felt something break loose inside her chest. I am scared of losing you, she confessed. If I let myself love you, if I let you become important to me and then something happens, I do not think I would survive it. You would, Lucas assured her. You have already survived the worst things you could imagine. You are stronger than you give yourself credit for. But Natalie, living in fear of loss means never really living at all. At some point, we have to decide that the possibility of joy is worth the risk of pain. Outside, the storm continued to howl, but inside the small ranch house, something warm and precious was being kindled. Natalie moved closer to Lucas, closing the distance between them, and rested her head against his shoulder. His arm came around her naturally, holding her with a gentleness that suggested she was something valuable, something to be treasured rather than endured. I think I might be falling for you too, she murmured against his shoulder. I have been fighting it, telling myself it was just gratitude or loneliness or anything other than what it actually is. But the truth is, you have become the best part of my days. When I am with you, I feel like maybe I could be whole again someday. Lucas pressed a kiss to the top of her head, a gesture so tender it made her eyes sting with tears. You are already whole. You have just been too hurt to see it clearly. All I am doing is reminding you of what was always there. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in blankets and each other's presence while the fire crackled and the storm raged. When they finally separated to settle down for sleep, Lucas on a pallet by the fire and Natalie in her own bed, the space between them felt less like distance and more like respect for the pace at which trust and intimacy should develop. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world transformed by snow and brilliant sunshine. Lucas helped Natalie check on her livestock and clear paths through the drifts before finally heading back to his own property. Before he left, he cupped her face gently in his hands and looked at her with such open affection that she felt her heart stutter. "May I court you properly?" he asked. "I know we have been spending time together, but I would like to make my intentions clear. I want to build something real with you, Natalie, something lasting." "I would like that," she replied, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she allowed herself to smile fully, genuinely, without holding back. Lucas's answering smile was radiant. "Then I will come calling on Sunday if that suits you. We can take a ride up to the high meadow, have a picnic if the weather holds." "It is a date," Natalie agreed, feeling giddy in a way that would have embarrassed her a few months ago but now just felt right. True to his word, Lucas arrived on Sunday afternoon with a basket packed with food and a blanket strapped to his saddle. They rode up into the mountains, following trails that wound between the pines and opened onto meadows where the snow lay pristine and unmarked. The air was crisp and cold, but the sunshine made it bearable, and the views from the high country were spectacular. They spread the blanket in a sheltered spot and shared the meal Lucas had prepared, simple but thoughtful. He had remembered that she loved apple preserves and had brought a jar along with fresh bread. They talked about everything and nothing, the conversation flowing easily now that the barriers between them had come down. "Tell me about your dreams," Lucas said at one point. "Before everything happened, when you were young and the future seemed full of possibility, what did you dream about?" Natalie was quiet for a moment, reaching back to memories she had locked away because they hurt too much to examine. "I dreamed about making the ranch successful, about building something my parents could be proud of. I wanted to improve the breeding stock, maybe expand into horses as well as cattle. I imagined having a family someday, children running around the property, growing up with the mountains and the freedom of open space." She paused, her voice softening. "Silly dreams, probably." "Not silly at all," Lucas said firmly. "Those are beautiful dreams, and there is no reason you cannot still achieve them. The ranch is not lost. You have kept it going through impossible circumstances. And as for family—" He reached over and took her hand. "That dream is not out of reach either if you want it." "Are you proposing, Lucas Xavier?" Natalie asked, trying for teasing but coming out more breathless than she intended. "Not yet," he replied with a smile. "But I am definitely declaring my intentions. When I do propose, it will be after you have had more time to be certain of your feelings and mine. Rushing into something this important would dishonor what we are building together." "You are patient to a fault," Natalie observed. "Only about things that matter," Lucas corrected. "And you, Natalie Voss, matter more than anything else in my world right now." As winter deepened, their courtship continued to blossom. Lucas came calling every Sunday without fail, and they spent long afternoons together, talking and working side by side. He helped her with heavy ranch work without making her feel incapable, and she found herself looking for ways to make his life easier as well, bringing meals to his property when she knew he had been working long hours on repairs. The people of Telluride began to take notice of the relationship, and while there was gossip, most of it was approving rather than scandalous. Folks remembered Lucas's help during the early winter storm and how he had proven himself to be a solid, dependable man. They also remembered how isolated Natalie had been and expressed quiet satisfaction that she was finally letting someone in. Christmas came, and Lucas invited Natalie to spend it at his property. He had decorated a small pine tree with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments, making the simple gesture feel festive. They exchanged modest gifts. She gave him a new pair of leather gloves she had saved for and purchased in town, and he gave her a beautiful carved wooden box for keeping treasured items. "I made it myself," he explained, showing her the careful joinery and the smooth finish. "Thought you might like having a special place for letters or keepsakes, things you want to protect." Natalie ran her fingers over the polished wood, touched beyond words. "It is beautiful. I cannot remember the last time someone made something specifically for me." They spent the evening cooking a simple meal together and talking by his fireplace, and when Lucas walked her home through the snow-covered night, he stopped her before they reached her door. "Natalie, I know I said I would wait to ask you properly, but I need you to know how serious I am about us. About building a future together. Would you consider, when the time is right, making me the happiest man in Colorado by agreeing to be my wife?" It was not quite a proposal, more of an acknowledgement of where they were heading, and Natalie appreciated the thoughtfulness of giving her both clarity and time. "Yes," she said simply. "When the time is right, when we are both certain, yes, I would marry you, Lucas." He kissed her then, their first real kiss, gentle and full of promise. When they separated, both were smiling, breath puffing in white clouds in the cold air. "I love you," Lucas said. "I know I said it before, but I want to say it again now that you might be ready to hear it differently." "I love you too," Natalie replied, and saying the words felt like stepping off a cliff and discovering she could fly. "I fought it for so long, but I cannot fight it anymore. I love you, Lucas Xavier, and it terrifies me and thrills me in equal measure." "We will be terrified together then," he said with a grin, and hopefully more thrilled than scared as time goes on. January brought brutal cold and heavy snow, making travel between their properties difficult. On one particularly vicious stretch of weather, Lucas appeared at Natalie's door looking troubled. "What is wrong?" she asked immediately, ushering him inside. "There has been talk in town," he said carefully, "about the men who might have been involved in your father's death. Apparently, one of them has been drinking heavy at the saloon and saying things he should not, boasting about how they scared off a stubborn rancher who would not sell." Natalie felt her blood run cold. "Who?" "Man named Jack Brennan. Works for a land speculator who has been buying up properties around here for mining access. The sheriff is finally paying attention because Brennan was drunk enough to say things in front of witnesses." "After all this time," Natalie whispered, sinking into a chair. "After months of them getting away with it, there might actually be justice." Lucas knelt beside her chair, taking her hands. "The sheriff wants to talk to you, get your statement about what you heard that night. It is not guaranteed they will be able to make charges stick, but it is more than nothing." Natalie felt a complex tangle of emotions: hope, fear, rage, and a strange sense of vindication. "Will you come with me to talk to the sheriff?" "Of course. I will be right beside you through all of it." The next day, despite the cold, they rode into Telluride together. The sheriff, a man named Tom Morrison who had been frustratingly dismissive of Natalie's suspicions before, was suddenly taking the matter seriously now that multiple witnesses had heard Brennan's drunken confession. Natalie gave her statement, describing the voices she had heard, the threats her father had received in the weeks before his death, and the circumstances that had made his supposed accident so suspicious. Lucas sat beside her throughout, his presence giving her courage she might not have found on her own. "I wish I had listened better before," Sheriff Morrison admitted. "I should have investigated more thoroughly when you first came to me. I let myself believe it was just a grieving daughter seeing conspiracy where there was only tragedy." "You can make it right now," Natalie said firmly, "by arresting Brennan and whoever else was involved and making sure they face justice." "Already have Brennan in a cell," the sheriff replied. "He has been singing like a canary since he sobered up and realized what he had said. Named 2 accomplices and the man who hired them. We should have arrests made within the week." Walking out of the sheriff's office, Natalie felt lighter than she had in months. The weight of unanswered questions and unpunished crimes had been crushing her, and while justice was not yet fully served, it was finally within reach. "How do you feel?" Lucas asked as they prepared to ride home. "Like I can finally breathe," Natalie admitted. "I did not realize how much energy I was spending on anger and fear until I felt some of it lift. My father deserves justice, and finally it looks like he might get it." "He would be proud of you," Lucas said. "For keeping the ranch, for surviving, for having the courage to keep fighting even when no one believed you." "He would have liked you," Natalie said with certainty. "He always said the measure of a man was in his actions, not his words. You have proven yourself through everything you have done since we met." Spring came late to the high country, but when it finally arrived in early April, it transformed the valley into something magical. Wildflowers bloomed in riotous color, the creek swelled with snowmelt, and the world felt renewed. The trial of Jack Brennan and his accomplices had concluded with guilty verdicts, and while nothing could bring her father back, Natalie felt a sense of closure that had been missing. On a warm afternoon with the sun shining bright and the aspens showing their first hint of new leaves, Lucas invited Natalie on a ride. They went to a place she had never been, higher up the mountain than she usually traveled, where a waterfall cascaded down rocks into a clear pool. "It is beautiful," Natalie breathed, taking in the scene. "I found it a few weeks ago," Lucas said. "I have been waiting for the right time to show you." He dismounted and helped her down from her horse, then led her to a flat rock overlooking the water. "Natalie," he began, taking both her hands in his. "6 months ago, I met a woman who was so wounded and defensive that she could barely stand to be in the same room with me. I saw past the thorns to the rose underneath, and I made a promise to earn her trust slowly. Today, I am standing here with the woman I love, someone who has opened her heart despite every reason not to, and I am asking if she will give me the honor of standing beside her for the rest of our lives." He pulled a ring from his pocket, simple gold with a small diamond that caught the sunlight. "Natalie Voss, will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Natalie's face, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow for the first time in longer than she could remember. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and certain. "Yes, Lucas, I will marry you. I will build a life with you, and trust you with my heart, and believe in the future we can create together." Lucas slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a kiss that felt like coming home. When they finally separated, both were grinning like fools. "I cannot believe I almost let fear keep me from this," Natalie said, looking at the ring on her hand and then back at the man who had given it to her. "I came so close to pushing you away permanently. But you did not," Lucas reminded her. "You were brave enough to give trust a chance, even when everything in your past told you not to. That is the remarkable thing about you, Natalie. You are so much stronger than you realize." They were married in June in a simple ceremony in Telluride, with half the town in attendance. Natalie wore a dress of pale blue that had belonged to her mother, altered to fit her frame, and she carried wildflowers from the mountain meadows. Lucas stood at the front of the small church looking nervous and eager in equal measure, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was met with applause and cheers from the assembled witnesses. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food contributed by seemingly everyone they knew. It was a celebration not just of their marriage but of Natalie's return to the community, her willingness to trust and be trusted after months of isolation. As the sun set and lanterns were lit, Lucas and Natalie stood together watching their friends and neighbors celebrate. "This feels like a dream," Natalie said, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "A year ago, I never would have believed I could feel this happy, this hopeful about the future." "Sometimes the best things come when we least expect them," Lucas replied, wrapping his arm around her waist. "I never expected to find love again after Clara, and certainly not with someone as extraordinary as you." "Do you think she would approve?" Natalie asked softly. "Your first wife, I mean. Do you think she would be happy that you found love again?" Lucas was quiet for a moment, considering. "I think Clara would love you. She always believed in living fully and loving boldly. She would be glad I found someone who makes me want to be better, who challenges me and supports me in equal measure. And she would want me to honor her memory by building a good life, not by staying stuck in grief." Natalie turned to face him fully. "I will never try to replace her or compete with her memory. She will always be part of your story, part of what made you who you are." "I know," Lucas said, touching her face gently. "And that is one of the many reasons I love you. You understand that we can honor the past while building something new." Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. Combining two properties meant long days of hard work, and there were disagreements about how to manage resources and make decisions. But they had learned to communicate honestly and to trust each other, and every conflict became an opportunity to strengthen their bond rather than weaken it. In the spring of 1879, Natalie discovered she was pregnant. She told Lucas one evening after dinner, watching his face transform from surprise to joy to something resembling awe. "We are going to have a baby," he repeated, as though he needed to hear it again to believe it. "Yes," Natalie confirmed, taking his hands and placing them on her still flat stomach. "Sometime in late September or early October, if the doctor's calculations are right." Lucas dropped to his knees in front of her, pressing his face against her stomach with a tenderness that made her throat tight. "I never thought I would get another chance at this," he whispered. "After losing Emma, I thought fatherhood was something in my past, something I would only remember rather than experience again." "You are going to be a wonderful father," Natalie assured him, running her fingers through his hair. "This baby is so lucky to have you." Pregnancy was difficult for Natalie, with sickness that lasted well into her second trimester and fatigue that made the simplest tasks feel monumental. Lucas was patient and attentive, taking on extra work around both properties so she could rest. He read to her in the evenings, brought her tea and dry toast when morning sickness struck at odd hours, and told her constantly how beautiful she was even when she felt swollen and uncomfortable. In early October, on a crisp autumn morning with the aspens golden on the mountainsides, Natalie went into labor. The town doctor came out to the ranch, and Lucas stayed by her side throughout the long, difficult ordeal. When their son finally arrived, screaming and healthy, both parents wept with relief and joy. "He is perfect," Lucas said, cradling the tiny infant with practiced ease. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Samuel after Natalie's father, with Lucas's surname Xavier carrying on the family line. Watching Lucas with their son, seeing the gentleness and love in every interaction, Natalie felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. "I never imagined this," she confessed one night as they lay in bed with Samuel sleeping in his cradle nearby. "A year and a half ago I was so alone, so convinced I would always be alone, and now I have you and our son and a life so full of love I can hardly believe it is real." "It is real," Lucas assured her, pulling her close. "This is what we built together. This is what happens when two people are brave enough to trust and love despite past pain." As Samuel grew from an infant to a toddler, the ranch prospered. Lucas's expertise with horses combined with Natalie's knowledge of the land created a successful operation that provided well for their growing family. In 1881, they welcomed a daughter they named Clara Emma, honoring Lucas's first wife and daughter while creating new memories and new love. Natalie had worried about whether she would feel secure loving another child after losing her parents so traumatically, but she discovered that love was not a finite resource. Each child expanded her capacity for affection and joy, and watching Lucas with their children healed wounds in both of them that had seemed permanent. By 1883, with two children running around the ranch and another on the way, Natalie sometimes had to remind herself of the broken woman she had been when Lucas first rode into her life. She had been so certain that trust was impossible, that opening her heart again would only lead to more pain. But Lucas had proven, day after day and year after year, that trust properly given and carefully tended could create something beautiful. "You ever regret it?" Lucas asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching Samuel and Clara play in the yard. "Agreeing to let me court you, taking a chance on us." "Never," Natalie said firmly. "You gave me back my life, Lucas. You showed me that surviving is not the same as living, and you had the patience to wait while I figured out the difference." "You gave yourself back your life," Lucas corrected gently. I just provided some support and encouragement. The courage to trust again, to love again, that all came from you." Their third child, a daughter they named Rose, was born in January of 1884. During a snowstorm that reminded Natalie of the night Lucas had ridden through a blizzard to help her with her cattle. She told him the story while she labored, reminding him of how she had been so astonished that anyone would take such a risk for her. "I would do it again in a heartbeat," Lucas said, holding her hand through a contraction. "I would ride through 1,000 storms to get to you." As the years passed, the ranch became known throughout the region for its quality horses and the integrity of the people who ran it. Samuel grew into a thoughtful boy who loved the mountains and showed a gift for working with animals. Clara was spirited and bold, constantly pushing boundaries and exploring every inch of their property. Rose was gentle and observant, content to sit and watch the world with wise eyes. By the time their fourth child, a son named William, arrived in 1886, Natalie and Lucas had been married for 8 years. They had weathered droughts and harsh winters, economic downturns and personal challenges, but their partnership had only grown stronger. The trust that had been so hard won in those early months had deepened into something unshakable, a foundation on which they had built not just a marriage but a legacy. "You remember what I told you the day we met?" Lucas asked one evening as they sat together watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and rose. "You said a lot of things," Natalie replied with a smile. "Which particular wisdom are you referring to?" "When you said you could not trust anyone, and I told you to let me earn it slowly." "I remember," Natalie said softly. "I thought you were naive or possibly crazy. I could not imagine anyone being patient enough to wait while I figured out how to open my heart again." "It was worth every moment of patience," Lucas said, taking her hand. "Every moment of waiting, every time you pushed me away, every small step forward. All of it led to this life we have built, and I would not change a single moment." Natalie leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady presence that had become her anchor and her home. "You taught me that trust is not given blindly or all at once. It is earned through consistency, through showing up day after day, through keeping promises even when it would be easier to break them. You earned my trust so thoroughly that now I cannot imagine a world where I did not trust you completely. And you taught me that love is not diminished by having loved before," Lucas replied. "That the heart has infinite capacity to hold both grief for what was lost and joy for what is found. You gave me permission to honor my past while building a future, and that was a gift beyond measure." As darkness fell and stars began to emerge in the vast Colorado sky, they sat together in comfortable silence. Inside the house, their children were settling down for the night, their voices carrying through the open windows in a symphony of questions and protests, and finally, reluctant agreements to sleep. "We have built something good here," Natalie observed, looking out at the ranch that had almost broken her but instead had become the foundation of everything she treasured. "We have," Lucas agreed. "And we will keep building it day by day for as long as we have together." Years continued to pass in the rhythm of seasons and celebrations. Samuel married at 22 to a girl from town, and they built a house on the northern edge of the property, expanding the ranch operation. Clara, true to her independent spirit, became a teacher in Telluride, riding to town each day with books and fierce determination to educate the next generation. Rose developed a gift for breeding horses, with an intuitive understanding of bloodlines and temperament that made her invaluable to the family business. William, the youngest, showed interest in veterinary medicine, studying everything he could about animal health and traveling to Denver for proper training when he came of age. Through all of it, Natalie and Lucas remained the center of the family. Their love for each other, a model of what marriage could be when built on trust, respect, and genuine affection. They grew older together gracefully, silver threading through their hair and lines appearing on their faces, badges of a life fully lived. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1904, their children organized a celebration at the ranch, with friends and neighbors coming from miles around. As Natalie looked around at the crowd, at the property that had been saved through her determination and Lucas's support, at the children and grandchildren running around, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. 25 years, Lucas said, coming up beside her and handing her a glass of punch. Who would have thought that stubborn woman who pointed a rifle at me would end up being my wife for a quarter century? That stubborn woman knew what she was doing, Natalie replied with mock indignation. She was protecting herself from charming cowboys who had dangerous ideas about earning trust slowly. Lucas laughed, the sound rich and warm. How did that work out for her? Better than she ever could have imagined, Natalie admitted, setting down her glass and taking his hands. You were right, Lucas, about all of it. Trust is something that can be earned. Love is worth the risk of pain. And sometimes the walls we build to protect ourselves are actually prisons we need to escape. We escaped together, Lucas said, pulling her close for a dance even though no music was playing. And we built something better than walls. We built a home, a family, a life worth living. As they swayed together in the yard of the ranch that had witnessed both heartbreak and healing, Natalie thought back to that dusty street in Telluride, where she had first encountered the man who would change everything. She had been so certain that isolation was safety, that trusting no one was the only way to survive. But Lucas had seen past her defenses to the woman underneath, and he had loved her patiently, persistently, until she found the courage to love him back. Their story had not been easy or simple. It had required vulnerability and bravery, patience and persistence. But every challenge had made them stronger. Every obstacle overcome had deepened their bond. The trust that had seemed impossible in the beginning had become the bedrock of everything they built together. As the sun set on their anniversary celebration, painting the Colorado peaks in shades of amber and rose, Natalie and Lucas stood together watching their family, their legacy, the life they had created from ashes and determination. The cowboy who had promised to earn trust slowly had done exactly that, day by day and year by year, until that trust had transformed into a love story for the ages. "I love you," Natalie whispered, the words as true and vital as they had been the first time she spoke them. "I love you too," Lucas replied, his voice carrying the weight of 25 years of promises kept and a lifetime of devotion. Forever and always. And in the fading light of a Colorado evening, surrounded by the evidence of a life built on trust and love, they held each other close, grateful for every moment of the journey that had brought them from lonely strangers to partners in every sense of the word. The ranch that had almost been lost to violence and grief had become instead a testament to the power of patience, the courage required for trust, and the transformative magic of love given freely and received with gratitude. Their children and grandchildren continued to work the land, each generation adding to the legacy, but always remembering the story of how it all began. With a woman who said she could not trust anyone, and a cowboy who promised to earn it slowly, one day at a time, until trust became love and love became everything.